Welcome to our AuthorConnect Chat. I am your host, Danielle Brown. As head of strategic partnerships and editorial, I work with authors, publishers, agents, publicists, and other incredible industry partners here at BookPal, where we believe in the transformative power of books to ignite continuous learning and growth. Stick around for more announcements at the end of this chat, including the winners of 3 signed books. But for now, let's get to the good stuff. We have 2 guests today who are actually returning guests of our AuthorConnect series. These 2 authors have spent more than 2 decades helping clients engage their employees on strategy, vision, and values. In their provocative, inspiring, and always entertaining talks, they provide real solutions for leaders looking to manage change, drive innovation, and lead multi-generational workforces. They are founders of The Culture Works, a global training company, and have been called fascinating by Fortune and creative and refreshing by the New York Times. Finally, their books have been translated into 30 languages and have sold more than 1.5 million copies. You might know their works All In, The Carrot Principle, Leading with Gratitude, and most recently, Anxiety at Work. Please welcome Adrian Gostick and Chester Elton. Thank you both so much for being here.
Yeah, delighted to be here, Danielle. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely.
Now, I am so lucky to have worked with your team on pre-orders for this book and seen a little bit of the impact that you are making on the business world. We're so lucky to have you back on the series to talk about it. So to kick things off, could you just give the brief elevator pitch of what this book is trying to accomplish?
Let me jump in and just say right from the get-go, Danielle, we are so grateful for your support for our work. You guys at BookPal have been phenomenal partners. And this book in particular is very important to both Adrian and I. You might notice that all our books have always been Gostick and Elton. You know, our goal was Lennon and McCartney, Gostick and Elton. That was the goal, right? Except for this book, it's Gostick and Elton and Gostick. We brought in Anthony Gostick, Adrian's son. And so I always give Adrian a chance because that's a big departure for us to have a third author, and that it's Anthony Gostick is just so personal and so wonderful. So Adrian, brag about your son for a minute.
Well, and this is a really good perspective that he brought. Anthony actually had the idea for this book back in high school. So he's 25 now. He's just about to start his PhD work at USC in stem cell biology and regenerative medicine, working in genetics on building new livers and hearts and all these amazing things. So not a dumb guy. So as he started working in labs, he started doing a lot of genetics work in his undergrad and then after. And he realized that as a person with anxiety that he's had all his life, he said, I realized that some managers got the best out of me and some just didn't know what to do with me. And yet he's a really amazing, contributor. He does amazing work, very bright. And so what he realized, he says, do you guys talk about mental health in your culture practice? And I said, not only do we not talk about it, nobody talks about mental health. It's one of those things you just don't talk about. And it's what we found as we started doing research, this is back in 2018, is that about 1 in 5 people working in North America had a full-blown anxiety disorder, but we don't talk about it. I mean, imagine that 1 in 5 people who work with you are coming with broken arms, but we don't talk about broken arms. It's just ridiculous. And what we realized is that there was this huge unmet need to talk about mental health and wellness, and managers just didn't know how to talk about it or how to begin. Well, then COVID hit, and the numbers just went through the roof.
What I really liked about the setup of this book is you do have this problem solution setup. You cover these 8 strategies, and they're all focused on a specific problem that an employer needs to address. But I loved how universal they are, but still applicable in this pandemic, and just how many things have shifted and changed because of that. And yet all of these strategies that you talk about are so applicable in those scenarios. So how did COVID essentially impact either the development of the book, which it was at the very tail end because your book was just coming out in a few months after that, or just the launch of the book itself and the way you approached the release?
Well, it's a great question. I love the way you position the book as there's a problem and then there's a solution, because what we found as we were digging into the research is everybody was aware that there was a problem. They just didn't know what to do about it, right? Call the EAP line, see a counselor, download a meditation app. Was kind of the best. And not that there's anything wrong with any of those. It's just it didn't address the core issue. You mentioned COVID. All of a sudden, it went from 18% of people having an anxiety disorder to 30%, which is a huge jump. And then in workers in their 20s, it was up to 42%. And yet only 1 in 10, so 90% of employees didn't feel comfortable talking to their boss. Only 1 in 10 felt safe. So it was the perfect magnifying glass. And what was really interesting, we were talking about this before we went live, it's now become okay to talk about it. Naomi Osaka pulling out of the French Open, and a lot of Olympians coming out and so on. So yes, it really did impact our work because it became sort of okay to talk about it, right, Adrian?
Yeah.
Yeah, and more necessary, I feel like, also because of the stress factors just going up and up and up with the pandemic. One of the things I really like about each chapter is how you talk about what you've probably heard. If you did bring this up in your workplace, if you did bring up these issues, you were probably shut down with things like A, B, and C. And then you address to employers and managers, this is how to reframe that, how to create a culture where it's more acceptable to talk about that and people aren't going to feel shut down, which just perpetuates the problem. So I really appreciate that. And how do you feel like that's come across in your work with these managers who maybe had to flip their own mindsets and then create those cultures that are a little more available for those conversations?
It's a great question. I was just doing a session about 2 weeks ago, and it was about 150 people, and they were all leaders of a real estate development company. And some were younger leaders, some were more mature. And so I did a book signing afterwards for Anxiety at Work. And so what was really interesting is just chatting with people afterwards, that the younger people to a person came up and said, "Thank you. We talk about this all the time, mental health. I mean, almost every conversation, we're talking about our mental health. I left a job," one of them told me, "because they just didn't understand the issues that I was going through." And yet the older workers, and it was good that they came up and they said, "Really? Is this really as big as you're making this out?" And the conversation began, and the younger and the older were starting to talk together, because there's this big generational divide where as older folks, we just said, "Well, rub some dirt on it, get back out there, just slap a smile on your face." And we've all done those types of things. And we realized it's just not helpful. It's not working. So this younger generation is not only willing to talk about this issue, but they're also, unfortunately, suffering from anxiety in much higher numbers. So as leaders, it's what's been heartening is to see leaders realizing, okay, what do I need to do differently, instead of what do they need to do differently to understand how we operate around here.
Yeah, just to add to that, there's been wonderful work done on psychological safety in the workplace. And we all agree, yes, you need that. I think now with COVID, particularly with anxiety in the workplace, we're talking more about emotional safety. I've got to feel safe, because see, our generation, there was such a strong stigma that if you had any kind of mental health issues, it was a sign of weakness, defective, not worthy of promotion or trust. And now we're realizing that, look, this is just a health issue like everything else. We've got to normalize that conversation. And the big thing is to destigmatize it, so that, once you come out and ask for help, we want you to do that, and then empathize. I was laughing with some friends and said, it's so interesting when you think of the really, really smart people, whether in your company or, friends and family, it seems like they all suffer from anxiety. That's like sort of a given, that if you're going to be super smart, there's going to be some anxiety there. And you think, well, those are the exact people we want to keep. So we should really figure this out and make it not just psychologically safe, but emotionally safe to go out and get help and talk about it. To me, that was just fascinating, because you think of super smart people, you go, oh yeah, they're all quirky, all of them. They've all got it.
Yeah,
Like,
I love how you
exactly.
I love how you brought that up, that it can be seen as a weakness. It has been for so long, but usually it can mean the opposite, that these are the ones who want to achieve the most and want to push themselves. And you just need to create the environment for them to succeed and not debilitate themselves or cause that problem. And there's this quote that I wrote down in one of the earlier chapters, I think in chapter 3, that says, teams are finding it is the mental game that is offering the greatest competitive advantage. And I love how you really set this up as a foundational understanding that it can really give a business a competitive advantage to focus more on mental wellness in the workplace. Can you talk a little bit about why that's the case and what that means?
Yeah, when we would do a session like this, maybe 5 years ago, we'd be, you might be asking us, what are the best leadership characteristics? And we would talk about vision, we would talk about clarity, clear communication, we'd talk about people who are able to lift and inspire a team. Now it comes down to one concept, and that is, it's empathy, it's compassion, it's that idea of, and it's not, you're everybody's best friend. No. That didn't work for Michael Scott at The Office. It didn't. But what we are looking for are managers who just are able to understand a little bit more how we operate as individuals and what are the challenges we're facing. In fact, I just got off a coaching call. We do a lot of executive coaching, and one of my CEOs that I'm working with, empathy, of his 23 human motivators, empathy falls almost at the bottom, and yet, as we're starting to work, he's realizing that everything he has to develop is to be more empathetic. It's prioritizing more for his people. It's not overloading his people. It's presenting a more clear vision of the future of the organization. All those things are bringing down anxiety and showing more empathy in him as a leader. So while it may not be something that naturally comes to him, he's realizing he has to develop that if he wants a team that's all in.
Well, and the competitive advantage is simply this. It's so interesting. The numbers don't lie. Right? 75% of millennials and Gen Z have left a job due to an anxiety disorder. So, and I'm convinced that the reason is because it's not safe to talk about. When they get overloaded, when they get anxious, when they just feel like they can't keep up, rather than talk about it and ask for help, they just leave. And you say, well, wait a minute. We want you to stay. Well, that's all part of that empathy that Adrian's talking about. One of my favorite chapters in the book is being an ally. And I think that's what, whether you suffer from any kind of anxiety disorder or not, you're looking for allies at work, people that believe in you, people that are cheering for you. It's really interesting. I was talking to a good friend of mine, and she's a transgender. And she said, it's so hard to wait for things to change, for people's attitudes to change. She said, but you know what? It's a lot easier to wait when you don't have to wait alone. And it just really struck me that when you've got someone that believes in you, that cares about you, that has this empathy that Adrian's talking about, you're more likely to stick around. You're more likely to give your best because this is your tribe. These are your people. That's the competitive advantage that you can't buy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. The numbers don't lie, and numbers are riddled throughout this book and really show the proof of everything that you're talking about. So I understand those managers who are saying, really, is it really that big of a problem? And you're answering that right in this book with, yes, it is. And here are the numbers to prove it. It's not just something we felt like talking about one day. And I really appreciate that. And one of the things that I noticed too, a lot of your methods center on this vulnerability and empathy of managers and taking the time to get to know their team so that they can solve whatever problems are in their culture and in their organizations, which can maybe take up a lot of time, maybe time they feel like they don't have, or maybe they feel like they have too many people under them to keep tabs on. What are some suggestions you'd have to help managers who feel overwhelmed by that task?
Well, I just want to jump in and say, hey, you may not have the time to get to know your people and figure it out. How much time have you got to hire 5 more people when the people you didn't have time for left? I mean, it's the old adage, pay me now or pay me later. And what we've actually discovered is it doesn't take that much time. I mean, certainly there's a discipline. You carve it out, you jump in and you talk to your people, just regular check-ins. And a regular check-in is just, hey, I've noticed this. The language I think is important. You don't come and say, hey, Daniel, you're suffering from anxiety, aren't you? I just read this book. My anxiety rater is up. It's you, right? You're anxious, right? I nailed it. You say, look, Daniel, I've noticed a couple of things. I've noticed that, you're always on time and you're starting to show up a little late. Your reports were always so detailed and now they're not up to your usual standard. I know this has been a tough year for all of us. What can I do to help? Is there anything I can do to help? It doesn't have to be a 2-hour therapy session. We're not asking you to be a therapist. We're asking you to ask simple questions and listen. And it can be that simple.
What was really cool reading this book was how many things I identified in myself, in my past, of things that I did where I thought, oh, wow, yeah, that was a sign for sure that I didn't even recognize myself or in someone else, or that someone else didn't recognize in me. But you point out all of these little signals that may seem like small details or small red flags. And if you're not paying attention, you could just skirt over them, or like you said, say, rub some dirt in it and you'll be fine. So what are some of those both internal and external signals that people can watch out for?
And this is a great question, Danielle, because a lot of times somebody will say, I can spot anxiety in people. It's when they're really getting really nervous. Well, actually, what you're looking for are changes in behavior, because some people who have anxiety get more talkative and they get really energetic, and some people get really withdrawn and very sullen. And you can't spot it by the way you think you spot it. You spot it by looking for changes. Like Chester said, I noticed normally you're always giving ideas in meetings. For the last couple of weeks, you haven't really spoken up much. Is everything okay? You're not looking for one-offs. You're looking for patterns in behavior that are different. And because everybody has one-off days where you just have a bad day. If you're looking to identify patterns here, you're looking for, something's been off the last week or two. What can I do to help? So really, I can give a list, and we have lists, and there are in anxiety work, we have lists of things to watch for. But really, if it comes down to it, watch for changes, because then something's happening. And as Chester mentioned, the 2 words to remember are, I noticed. Not, do you have anxiety? It's, I noticed something is different. Is everything okay? Because you mentioned that idea of vulnerability. If they won't start talking, you talk about yourself. Boy, I've been having challenges. My parents, they're aging. I'm worrying about them. Trying to get kids to do, this school and that, and remote work. There's so much going on. I know I'm feeling things. Are you doing okay? We try to create that connection through vulnerability ourselves.
Yeah, and just be aware of the fact that because of the stigma of mental health, those that are suffering are really good at hiding it. Say, oh, my people talk to me about everything. I wish they'd share less. Because of that stigma, if you've got those issues, you get really good at hiding it. So you've got to spend time with your people, get to know them, and trust me, the time you spend up front is worth so much more on the back end in productivity and engagement and all that good stuff.
I love what you're saying too about using I notice, because that in and of itself is like an act of compassion, because then the employee knows, oh, you're paying attention, you're looking at how I'm behaving, I feel seen just in the very act of having that conversation. So that can make tremendous bounds towards that, rather than saying, do you have anxiety? Do you have a problem? So I really appreciate that coaching. And you have a lot of that in the book as well that I love. There was one thing that we hadn't touched on yet that I just find a really fascinating concept you bring up throughout the book, and I want you to explain it as well for the people watching, which is duck syndrome. And to your point about, hiding that problem because of the stigma, this is a perfect example of how that can happen. So what is duck syndrome?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. And, we heard this from a lot of younger people who are calling themselves ducks now. This actually began at Stanford University, where students would call themselves the duck. And that the ducks. The idea is, when you look at a duck, they're swimming so gracefully across the pond. They seem so serene. But you put the camera under the water and you'll see that their legs are constantly moving like mad to try them stay not only afloat and moving, but upright. And that's how a lot of younger people we interviewed started saying, I feel like that. I'm supposed to look like I'm just in charge of everything. I'm doing so well, but under the surface, I'm paddling like mad to stay afloat. In fact, one young woman said, she says, I think about myself as one of the little ducklings behind, because all of the little ducklings, we're all paddling like mad, but none of us know that the other ones are doing it. We all think everybody's just gliding calmly. And that's one of the ideas, that one of the hard parts of anxiety, it makes people feel alone. They don't realize that, no, everybody's feeling this. If there's one sort of silver lining from the pandemic, it's that leaders started realizing, oh my gosh, this mental health stuff is real, as they started feeling overwhelmed and anxious and not uncertain about the future. So really, that's when you think about the duck syndrome and how you tackle it, that's where we get into the like you say, the problem, the solution. The 8 strategies we present in the book are ideas to help overcome this feeling in people.
Yeah, and I feel like the root cause of so much of the anxiety issues you talk about is fear. Fear is always the root. And so what an employer or a manager can do is to help alleviate that fear, because those ducks can feel like, I'm just doing this just to stay afloat, just because I'm scared of what might happen if I stop, or I'm scared of what might happen if I'm not pedaling or kicking fast enough to meet someone's expectations, etc. And so that fear can just eat away at them, whereas the manager can actually do something to help alleviate that fear of, job security, like you talked about, or just the unknown, like you were saying, and so many of those other things that just can put a little seed of doubt in people.
Absolutely, yeah. Uncertainty is the biggest driver of anxiety. And our modern workplaces create more uncertainty than any place. And managers say, well, yeah, but we are in uncertain times. But you can make people feel like you're going through it together. We're going to go into the dark together. We're going to figure this out. I'm going to let you know as soon as I know about competitive threats. I'm going to give you our future vision. It's not just once a year. Every week, we're going to talk about where we're going, what our mission is, what our goals are, how things are changing. And most importantly, as you said, Danielle, how am I doing? I'm going to let you know how you're doing. Are you adding value? That is going to bring down a tremendous amount of anxiety if you reduce uncertainty for me as much as you can.
And I love the way we conclude the book, actually. There's 8 strategies, and the 8th strategy is gratitude. It's so funny because we published Leading with Gratitude, and then we came out with Anxiety at Work, and people said, well, that's kind of a whiplash moment. That's about 180 degrees. And yet, one of the ways that you know that you have an ally, particularly in a manager or supervisor, is that they're cheering for you. They see the good work you're doing. They don't forget to say thank you. They include you. They let you know how valued you are. It's the human brain is really interesting. It's not wired to keep you happy. It's wired to keep you safe. That's why negative things, register with us. We're constantly looking for danger, right? Well, you can't be in a state of anxiety and a state of gratitude at the same time. You can only hold one emotion. So as leaders, and as teammates, if you can create that culture of gratitude that we talk so much about, you're going to tamp down anxiety, because I feel safe here. I know that my supervisor, my teammates are looking out for me. We're in this together, as Adrian said. And the big message is, I'm not alone. I can talk about these things. And I know it's safe because I know they appreciate and they value me, not just as a teammate, also as a person. So I love the concluding, strategy there, because it's such a positive thing in what can be perceived as kind of a touchy and unsafe subject to talk about.
Definitely. And that was another one of the quotes that I wrote down, was about how employees want managers who are advocates, not just people who tolerate them and tolerate it. And I really appreciated that. And gratitude goes hand in hand. And that whole idea of not being alone and that advocacy from a manager can just make such a world of difference. So that is all for the questions that we have for today. Thank you so much. This has been such a fulfilling, uplifting conversation, despite us talking about anxiety for the whole of it. Before we close, what is the best way for viewers to connect with you after watching this chat?
Oh, thanks, Danielle. Of course, pick up a copy of our book, Anxiety at Work, or you can go to gostickandelton.com. We also have a podcast called Anxiety at Work, which really gets into, with some amazing guests, gets into this issue.
Yeah, and follow us on LinkedIn. We're constantly publishing great articles there. We've got a wonderful gratitude journal that we publish twice a month. We've got over 110,000 subscribers, where we highlight the podcast. We highlight gratitude and anxiety. It's a great place to follow us there as well. So don't forget LinkedIn.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Adrian and Chester, for sharing your amazing insights with the BookPal community. And thank you to those of you who were able to attend live or are watching this recorded. If you haven't read it already, I do highly recommend Anxiety at Work. It is relatable to employees and employers alike and contains truly tactical and actionable strategies to better cope with work-related anxiety. We do have 3 signed copies of the book to give away, and we've selected 3 winners at random, which are Jess J, Barry V, and Daphne R. We have your email addresses, so we will reach out to get your best mailing addresses for those signed copies. Congratulations. To purchase 25 copies or more of Anxiety at Work for your team, organization, or community, visit bookpal.com or email sales@bookpal.com. And to our live attendees, we will be sending out an email with the recording of this chat next week. So keep your eye out for that email and make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter to be the first to know about upcoming events. Our next Author Connect will be on September 16th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, where we will be chatting with Scott Miller about his new book, Marketing Mess to Brand Success. So make sure you're subscribed again to that Author Connect newsletter and visit our website to see more. Thank you so much again, Adrian and Chester, for joining us, and we'll see everyone next time. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep growing. Thanks for watching.